This is Surfing Through Cinema. I'm your host, Hawaii Harry. Today I will be discussing the next film for Classic Hollywood Week. This is a film that's famous for its romance, its dialogue, and its plot twist ending. Set during World War II and also filmed in the middle of it, I'm of course talking about Casablanca. So some technical details about Casablanca. It won the Academy Award for Best Picture. And and all the actors and the people who worked on the movie, they just thought it was going to be an average, war love story, but it ended up being the Best Picture of the year. So they didn't set out to be a really, really good movie. They were just trying to make a cheap, nice B movie in the middle of World War II. So that's why it's got some charm to it, because they did spend a lot of money on the sets and all of that, but not as much as, let's say, Gone with the Wind or any other movie made during that era that had a huge budget. So yeah, they didn't set out to make a really good movie, but as a result of that, they did end up making one of the best movies ever. And not many people know this, but the original screenplay was actually adapted from a play called Everybody Comes to Rick's. And this play was never released. And so Warner Brothers bought the rights to the play and made it into a movie. And as a result of that, there's never been a play made of it. Now, funny enough, during the 80s, the script for the movie was released to a bunch of Hollywood readers, who are people who read through scripts to kind of determine if a studio is going to fund it. And they named the title of they renamed it from Casablanca, and it was kind of a joke. They sent it around to the different studios under the same title of the play. They thought it was too old-fashioned, that the dialogue was slow, and a couple other problems. And it wasn't until after they realized this was the screenplay to Casablanca. So it just kind of shows that despite how wonderful and amazing some movies are, if you try to make them in a different era, even if it's the exact same script, it may not fit with the audience. So yeah, that's kind of a funny little tidbit about the history of the screenplay. And a kind of cool thing is Warner Brothers decided to release Casablanca ahead of its original schedule in May of 1943. They decided to release it in November of 1942 to coincide with the actual invasion of North Africa and Casablanca by the Allies, as kind of a triumphal moment. And so you don't hear anything like that anymore. Like, it's insanity to think that a movie that's not only based on events in World War II, but is actually happening in the middle of it. So that's a really, really cool fact to know about the history of it. And it just goes to show, like, the importance of this movie. Alright, so now I'm going to get into the plot of Casablanca. A restaurant called Rick's Cafe Americain which is in Casablanca, Morocco, is a huge area where refugees come to kind of find transit out of Casablanca. So a shady figure named Ugarte, he has 2 letters of transit to help people get out of Casablanca, and he gives them to Rick to hide them so that the Germans who are trying to take over Casablanca don't find them. Because the Germans, they were trying to shut down and make sure nobody escapes from Casablanca. So Rick hid them, and his former lover Ilsa comes along, and he hadn't seen her in a long time, and he still was having harsh feelings towards how she just abruptly left him while Germany was invading Paris. And so he's reluctant to talk to her at first, but eventually he is convinced to help Ilsa and her husband, who's a who's like a rebel fighter who's trying to fight against the Nazis and against every other type of bad regime in World War II. And he agrees to help them escape on the condition of Rick takes the letter and takes Ilsa for himself to go to America. As they're being chased towards the airport, Rick and Ilsa talk for the last time because Rick had tricked Ilsa into thinking that Rick was going to actually take her to America, but in reality, he helped them escape by forcing her to go on the plane with her husband. And she's very confused, and she said, "But Rick, I thought you loved me. I thought you wanted to go with me." And he said, "You told me to do the thinking for us, and we both know that you and Victor belong together, not me and you. And you deserve to escape America. You deserve to escape to America." And so, this is the moment you realize Rick has actually been helping people escape from Casablanca, and he's been using his restaurant to kind of help be an underground railroad. And so Ilsa and Victor get on the plane and leave, and then then Rick and his friend, who's the captain over the area, he's the French police officer in charge of the area, they also escape the area. They also escape, and that's where the film ends. You don't know what happens as a result of all of this. And yeah, it's a great and wonderful plot. I absolutely love it. This movie is the quintessential Hollywood film because the dialogue is very smart, very intelligent. The characters are really likable and you can really connect with them. But they also leave a shade of mystery. You don't know exactly what's going on. You know, the characters know a lot more than the audience does. So you're trying to figure out what's going to happen. Is Rick really this cruel and mean of a person? Because the whole time he's given off this persona of he's tough, he doesn't pick any sides, he's just trying to make his way in the world. But at the end, you really realize, wow, he puts that on as a cover so that he can actually help people escape. And yeah, you really start to like him as a character at the end of the movie. And yeah, that's the plot for Casablanca. I really enjoyed it. Alright, well, I'm going to go on a break real quick, but first here's a message from our sponsor.
This podcast is brought to you by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Here's how. It's totally free. There are tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your computer and even your cell phone. But that's not all. Anchor distributes your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many more. You could even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor is everything you need to make a complete podcast all in one small place. So go on and download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today.
Okay, so we're back from our break. Now I'm going to get into some critical reviews and my personal reviews of Casablanca. So the New York Times, they say they love the sentiment, the humor, and the pathos with taut melodrama and firstling intrigue. So what's kind of common with a lot of critics of this movie is they really praise it, like I said, the writing, the drama of it, the pathos. A lot of people really like this film for these specific reasons. And across the board, many of the newspapers, many of the film websites, they thoroughly enjoy this movie. And it's kind of rare to find a differing opinion of it. The only one I could find was on Rotten Tomatoes. It was just one rotten review of it. And basically he was saying that he thought it was overrated, that the drama of it wasn't that great. And so, yeah, that kind of begs the question, is it really as good as people say it is? And so, with that in mind, speaking of Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 99%. The critics give it a 99%. And just that one negative review of it. And some people may think, well, that's kind of biased. Everybody loves this movie. But when you look at the audience review, they gave it a 95%. So either it's people who just absolutely love the movie, or it really is that good of a movie. So how do we find that out? How do we decide if this really is a good movie or not? So let me know in the comments, what do you guys thoroughly and honestly think of Casablanca? Because it kind of is a question of, is it really that good? And then IMDb, it has an 8.5 out of 10, and there were a lot of high reviews of it, but I did find a couple that said they thought the pacing of it was too slow. They thought the drama was a little too much. It wasn't that intriguing or exciting. That is pretty understandable too. The first time I watched it, it was kind of hard to follow for me, and maybe that was just because the dialogue is spoken pretty fast, so it can be pretty hard to understand. So this time around, when I watched it for this review, I had the subtitles on, and I actually enjoyed reading the dialogue just as much as listening to it. So that could be a reason why some people have a negative review of it, is they had a hard time following the dialogue. Because there is a lot of exposition and a lot of things said and not really seen. So if you don't follow along with the dialogue too much, you can get lost in it. And not really in a good way. You could you could potentially miss some key plot points. But like I said, there's not a whole lot of people who have negative reviews on this movie. It's definitely not a perfect movie, but it's still highly praised for a lot of reasons. And so now I'll get into my personal reviews. Personally, it's number 3 on my favorite movies of all time list. I saw past all of its flaws. There's a couple continuity errors and a couple things that didn't really make sense to me till the second time around. But I really enjoyed this movie. The dynamic between Rick and Ilsa was phenomenal. It really was a great romantic pairing. Funny enough, though, Humphrey Bogart, he's only 5'8", and Ilsa and Ingrid Bergman, who played Ilsa, she's 5'10". So the whole time he was wearing stilts, or they were sitting down, he was on cushions. It's hilarious, but it was very seamless. Like, I didn't know that until doing the research for this, that was the case. So they really played it off nicely. I really enjoyed it. I really connected with Rick. He's kind of like the tough guy, and only sticks up for himself. He's very similar to how Han Solo is, kind of how Indiana Jones is as well. And I learned that Harrison Ford, he also bases a lot of his characters off of Humphrey Bogart, so you could definitely see the inspiration. Another aspect, I still really enjoyed the dialogue of it. Even if the first time around I had a hard time understanding it, I really enjoyed it, especially the second time around. The way they talk is kind of how they tried to do in Ocean's 11. Like, they refer to things, but they don't actually flat out say what they're thinking or feeling. And I think they did that a lot better in this movie than they did in Ocean's 11. So I'm sure they took some inspiration from this. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. Like, Rick's sense of humor, he's like very dry but very sarcastic, and it was really, really funny. So it still holds up to this day. That's what I'm trying to get at. Like, it's still very enjoyable for its humor, its dialogue, and yeah. Now, my most favorite part of the whole movie actually is the ending of it. Usually that you wouldn't think of that, but the plot twist ending was phenomenal. Like, the whole time you think Rick is a jerk, he doesn't care about anybody, but when he decides But when he tells Ilsa, okay, get on the plane with your husband, she realizes, wait, he's trying to help me escape. But I thought he was going to come with me. And he's like, no, you got to go with your husband. This is the right thing. And you realize how much of a hero he really is. It's kind of sad we had to wait till the end, but I think it's totally worth the wait because they have this build-up of you kind of not liking him, thinking he's a jerk. And I love how it totally changed at the end. Like I said, kind of like Han Solo. How in episode 4 of Star Wars, you think he doesn't care about anybody, only out for himself. But then he shows up at the end to help Luke blow up the Death Star. You know, he helps Luke not get destroyed by Darth Vader. So, yeah, he's definitely not an anti-hero, but more of a... I guess he's kind of like an anti-hero. So, yeah, those are my thoughts and feelings about Casablanca. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I highly recommend watching it. You know, like I said, there's a couple flaws of it, but I think if you look past it, you can really see the charm and the beauty that it really is. Now the question is, where would you watch Casablanca? Because it's not available on many streaming services. It's really only available on HBO Max. So, I personally bought a copy of it on DVD, but it's available digitally on iTunes. It's available on YouTube. Basically anywhere you would normally buy a movie digitally, you can find it on there. But I recommend buying it on DVD or at least on iTunes if you need to buy it digitally, because they provide a lot of background and behind the scenes that you wouldn't really see streaming. So yeah, that's something worth purchasing. Alright, so that's Casablanca. So next time I'll be discussing the next film for Star Wars Week. This is a film that takes place just mere minutes before the beginnings of Episode 4 of Star Wars. And I'm of course talking about the recent hit, Rogue One: A Star Wars Story. Alright, well until next time, this has been Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry. Take care. Thank you for listening to Surfing Through Cinema. Make sure to check us out on Facebook at Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry and on Instagram with Surfing Through Cinema. We also have a website, www.anchor.fm/surfingthroughcinema, where you can learn more details on upcoming episodes and on past episodes.